Hello, guys. My name is Benway MMA, and UFC Fight Night, Top vs. Royval ended, and it was the last card on ESPN and the last card of 2025. And it was a pretty good card. There was two notable performances that I wanted to focus on before we get started with the matchmaking, and that was Steven Concrete Asplund and Kevin Vallejos. Who would have thought, guys, that the heavyweight Max Holloway would be a 500-pound heavyweight named Steve Asplund? He had a very impressive performance. He beat the piss out of Sean Saraf. Pillar to post, he put a beating on him. He was working that one too. As soon as he started finding those uppercuts in round two, he put Saraf away. Very impressive performance, captivating personality. I think in the heavyweight division, he'll go far with his personality. He'll go far with his skill set. He said it himself. He's got the cardio that will make heavyweight sink. I'd like to see it. Let's see what his matchmaking will be today. Kevin Vallejos, on the other hand, he knocked out Giga Chikadze with a spinning back fist, more or less. He followed that up with some vicious ground and pound. He landed a bunch of elbows on Giga before the ref was able to stop it. But the knockout blow was the spinning back fist, and ironically enough, he landed a good hook on Giga Chikadze, and Giga hit him with a little shrug, a little missed me, that didn't hit me, and then he ate a hellacious spinning back fist, knocked him out pretty cold. And so yeah, that was a pretty good fight. So here's that spinning back fist from Kevin Vallejos. This is what knocked out Chikadze. Here is Steven Asplund, a heavyweight prospect. There's only 40 of them. We'll see who are matching up with him next. And so let's get started. Here is who will be matchmaking. These are the winners and losers of the fight night. Not every winner and loser will be here. These are the notable winners and losers. There was a draw, for example, between Buchecha and Nechekwu. I'm not interested in matchmaking fights like that. The female fights, for example, not particularly interested in matchmaking those. These were what I found interesting, and these what I want to matchmake. And so let's get right started with Manel Kape, who knocked out Royval in the first round. He landed a nasty hook. It was very Ilia Topuria-esque. He boxed him in on the fence. He landed that hook. He followed up with some ground and pound, and it was over. Someone feed me a cyanide pill. I am a big Brandon Royval fan, and this puts him on a little skid. This puts him outside of the title shot for a while, which for flyweight is actually a good thing. Speaking of flyweight, in order to matchmake Manel Kape, I have to explain some flyweight matchmaking outside of Kape, outside of Royval. I have to explain some matchmaking that the UFC has already done. And so, I'm just going to tell you who I think Kape should fight next, and then explain backwards from there. Manel Kape should face Tatsuro Taira next. I know you're probably thinking, wait a second, MMA Benway. This, Tatsuro Taira should get the title shot next. Maybe Kape should get the title shot next if Pantoja isn't available. And that's the question, if. And I think Pantoja, with the status as champion that he has, I do think he'll be available in the next 6 months. And because of that, I think he should fight Joshua Van next. He deserves the immediate rematch. I don't think he'll be out as long based on the videos that we're seeing him of already doing rehab. It doesn't look like he's going to need surgery. They said it was a dislocation. The severity of that dislocation is at this point unknown. But we're not hearing words like torn or surgery yet. And so I think if he's able to get in there with 6 months, which I think he will be able to do, that he should fight Van next. And so that's number one and the champion taken. So that leaves Manel Kape, who is likely to be number two after beating Brandon Royval, against Tatsuro Taira, who is number three. And we're doing that because Van is going to rematch Pantoja. Next, that leaves Brandon Royval. Who does he fight next? So number 4 and number 7, Brandon Moreno number 4, and number 7, Asu Almabayev, are already fighting. So both of them are unavailable. The next best rankings is number 5 and number 8. they're already fighting. Amir Albazi, number 5, versus Kyoji Horiguchi, number 8, are fighting. Same thing with number 11 and number 13, Alex Perez versus Charles Johnson. They're also fighting next year. That means the only real available matchups for Brandon Royval are Steve Erceg, Tim Elliott, Tagir Umbekov, Bruno Silva, and Leonard Carbonell, at least in the rankings. I don't think the UFC is going to give him an unranked fighter. I don't see any unranked fighters who deserve that fight. I think out of those options available, the best fight to make has got to be the one, the only Bedtime MMA. I'm just kidding. Now, this is Steve Erceg, also known as Bedtime. I think it's the only matchup that's available. He's sitting at number 10 here, Steve Erceg. I think Brandon Royval is going to sit around the number 6 position because that's where Manel Kape was fighting at. Number 6 versus number 10 is not too far-fetched. Brandon Royval has fought a lot of the flyweight division, and so he needs a fresh matchup. He has not fought Erceg yet. This is the only fight to make for Brandon Royval. The only odd ones out in the rankings after this would be number 9, Tim Elliott, number 12, Tagir Umbekov, number 14, Bruno Silva, and number 15, Leonard Carbonell. I think all 3 or 4 of those guys can either fight unranked opponents to give them an opportunity, or they can fight each other. Most of them are coming off of losses, except Tim Elliott, who fought Kaya Sakura and got that win, I'm pretty sure. That was his most recent win. Everyone else is coming off of a loss. They need to fight each other, or they need to fight down in the rankings to defend their position. I don't think any of them deserve Brandon Royval. Moving on next, Kevin Vallejos, gangster performance. He is now probably going to be in number 15 in the rankings. He was not ranked previously. Giga was number 15. I do think he deserves that number 15 spot. And I do think with this kind of performance where he's getting a very flashy knockout, he deserves to fight up in the rankings. He also has that storyline with John Silva. And so if we can push him up the rankings in a careful way to where he's within striking distance of that John Silva rematch, that's a perfect opportunity for the UFC to have a fight that has a storyline. That's a perfect fight for either of these two fellas to get a title shot off of beating each other, or, getting into that title contention position. And so I think not the only, but the best option for him to do that, to get him up the rankings, to get him close to the top 10, to get him closer to that John Silva rematch and eventually that title, has to be number 12, Patricio Pitbull. This is going to get him higher up in the rankings, like I said. I think it's relatively low risk, and it's an opportunity to shine on what is essentially a human heavy bag in Patricio Pitbull. I think it's risky enough to where he's going to elevate his game and become a better fighter for it. That's something I do like to see. When we feed these guys cans forever, like Bo Nickel, we don't see him develop as much. Now they got him on that developmental path again, and he's doing a lot better. That's what we need to continue doing with Vallejos. I also think for Vallejos, it's a somewhat decent scalp to collect. Patricio Pitbull does have some hardcore and casual name value. And so when he collects that scalp, it'll help him get he basically will steal any, I don't want to call hype from Patricio Pitbull. There's none of that at this point in his career, but it does push him closer to that name value, to that casual name value that we need. One final thing I'll say about this matchup is that Pitbull has only had one TKO loss to Suzuki. He had a TKO loss to basically hurting his ankle against Benson Henderson back in the day in Bellator. But I think if Kevin Vallejos can continue his finish streak and knock out Patricio Pitbull, then at that point, the only fight to make would be John Silva. John Silva is going to be fighting Arnold Allen. I think if he wins that fight, I don't think he'll be in the top 5. I think he'll be maybe number 9 through 7 at best. And if Kevin Vallejos at that time is number 12, then that puts them in perfect territory for a rematch, and they are in title contention at that point. And so moving on next, Giga Chikadze. He is likely to leave the rankings after this recent loss against Kevin Vallejos. Unfortunately, I think Chikadze has hit that point in his career. He's basically hit unk status, and his best use to the UFC now is at a gatekeeper at best and a stepping stone at worst. They're going to use him to build other fighters. They're going to use him to show whether other fighters deserve a ranking or deserve a ranked opponent. And in doing so, I think his best opponent, not for him, but before the UFC, for the matchup, is Jose Delgado. So Jose Delgado fought Nathaniel Wood recently in a fight that a lot of people think was a robbery. I somewhat agree. I think all close fights, or I mean, all robberies are close fights anyways. So it was a very, very close fight that we do know. We do know both of those guys. I think Nathaniel Wood might be ranked. I think he might be number 15. But we know both of those guys were on the cusp of rankings, if not became ranked off of winning against each other. And so, Giga's coming off a loss. Delgado's coming off a loss. He's coming off a loss we thought was robbed, and this is an opportunity for Delgado to prove that he can get a ranked opponent if he beats Chikadze. For Chikadze, he can kind of prove the same. He can prove that he still can hang around in that top 25 range. That being said, I don't think Chikadze wins this. I don't think he gets any more easy or free matchups. I think he's at that point where he has enough name value where he has to fight these young killers, these young prospects. And I think that's Jose Delgado. And Jose Delgado is likely to sleep him and build up his name. And I think that's the perfect matchup to build Delgado. Unfortunately, this is the point where Giga's career is at, Bye-bye, Giga. Next up, Michal Oleksiejczuk. Very hard to pronounce that last name. So he had a stinker against Cesar Almeida. It was basically a grappling wrestle fuck from Oleksiejczuk. And it was kind of unfortunate because I think the UFC had set up that fight to be a striking battle. Oleksiejczuk was on a 5-fight TKO streak before this debut, including a vicious 30-second TKO on the Contender Series. And so we know this guy can stand and bang, and that's what we wanted to see against Almeida. And I get it. Almeida was a very dangerous and experienced striker, but it was a very disappointing fight to see regardless. He got the win. We can move that past. He's got his debut over with. He needs to fight, I think, another jobber to develop his name and to develop a highlight reel, basically. He's fighting with the Fighting Nerds, so I think his ceiling could potentially be high, definitely higher than his brother. But we need to give him, a body bag, a literal corpse, a human heavy bag. He needs to have a stationary target, an absolute victim in Alex Morono. So yeah, Morono is pretty terrible. I think I'm not sure where he's at on his contract. The one thing he's willing to do, though, that makes him an asset to the UFC and makes him a good matchup here, he loves to stand and bang. He'll swing and bang with anyone. That's his bread and butter. He often gets finished, and he's kill or be killed. And in this situation, I think he's going to get killed. But Oleksiejczuk, it's not a big step up. If I step up at all, it's an opportunity for him to show off. I do think he needs to develop more. I think Michael Bisping was kind of getting at this in the commentary, but he wasn't going for subs. He wasn't really going for ground and pound. If that's the kind of fighting style that you're going to have, or if you're going to use wrestling in your skills, you need to be well-rounded enough in the offensive part of that game, in actually getting damage and trying to go for submissions. Before I think you fully do that, you're gonna end up like Torres Finney if you don't. That's a terrible example because this doesn't really apply to Oleksiejczuk. I think he's fine, but these matchups are important. Let's build him up with some free matchups before we give him some more, dangerous strikers or grappling heavy fighters where he's either going to have to offensively grapple to deal with the striking, or he's going to have to defensively grapple to deal with their offensive grappling. Moving on, Melquizael Costa. He had an insane head kick who was it? I can't believe I just forgot, but he slept that man. He slept him out cold. I can't believe, how did I forget who Costa fought? Am I retarded? Morgan Chartier. Oh my God. So yeah, he sleeps Morgan Chartier out cold. They basically, in the first minute, they're exchanging some leg kicks. It feels like Costa finds his range with a jab. He throws out a heavy head kick. It lands clean. Chartier is looking up around on the canvas like, "Yo, who hit me with that that head kick, man?" He was done. Very impressive knockout. Costa's on, it's a 5-fight winning streak. He's fought I think it's so he's KO'd Morgan Chartier. He's beat Julian Erosa. He's beat Christian Rodriguez. He's beat Andre Philly and that Asian dude, Nurden Becky. And so I think this is somewhat similar to Kevin Vallejos. He deserves to fight up. He deserves a ranked opponent because of the fact that he's on this streak and he got such an impressive finish as well. And so in saying that, the matchup that he deserves easily, Mustache Man, Dan Ige. Dan Ige. 15. I showed up to the Apex with 4 minutes and fought Diego Lopez to a 29-28. And because of that, everyone loves me. Because of that, I'm the best. Because of that, I'm not a journeyman. You're a journeyman. I think Dan Ige is a little overranked right here with Costa's performance. I think he deserves to fight someone like Ige, where he should get a stand-up fighter. You know, Ige with Nixick is not the same fighter. Nixick, I think, tends to neuter these fighters the closer they get to the top, the closer they get to the rankings. But I think Danny gets still a solid fighter. He'll test Costa's cardio and durability, and Ige himself has enough skill and durability to see if Costa can handle being the nail again. Because the only time we've really seen, not the only time, but the most recent time we saw Costa in real trouble was when he could not handle being the nail against Steve Garcia. So I think this matchup could answer some questions as to whether Costa can handle the pressure, not being able to implement his own pressure, being pressured instead, facing someone who has some dangerous hands, since he really couldn't really handle that against Steve Garcia. And I think Ige needs to defend his ranking after losing to Patricio Pitbull. I don't think either of these guys belong in the rankings. I think if you lose to Patricio Pitbull, you don't belong in the rankings. And I think beating Dan Ige, I guess it gives you in the rankings, but it just feels like such a fraudulent spot for both of these guys. I think Kevin Vallejos deserves to take the Patricio Pitbull spot, and Costa deserves to take Danny Ige's spot. So moving on, Ultimate Unk status, Bobby Green, King Green, and I'll have a video soon, guys. Ultimate Unks in the UFC tier list. That'll be fun. Bobby Green is probably going to be in the A tier. Anyways, Bobby Green's in one of those situations where I don't think we want to keep feeding him up and comers. Not that this, what was it, Lerome something, or what was this guy's name again? Or Lance Gibson Jr. was an up and comer. I think that guy's an absolute jobber. I think he's garbage. But I think we need to give King Green a matchup that's fun at this point in his career. I think he's put in the work against the prospects. He just came off a win. He's close to retirement. If this isn't his retirement fight, that's fine, but this is a fun one. Let's give him Michael Johnson. So this is like the Unk Super Bowl for the UFC. It's a super Unk status fight. They're also a great matchup. They both have fast hands, great boxing. They both kind of have some trash talk, especially Bobby Green. They both kind of emote in the cage, especially Bobby Green again. Both of them are 39, so age is fair. It's a non-factor there. I literally think this is almost like the chaotic evil versus chaotic good memes. Michael Johnson is just a non-hood, blue-collar, blue-chip, varsity version of Bobby Green. And I actually, at this point in their careers, I don't know who wins that fight. This is the kind of fight that Michael Johnson drops, and then they feed him some prospect next, like Bonfim, and he beats him. So I think this is an interesting matchup. Unk versus Unk, similar styles. Let's see which black Unk at the barbecue's got better hands. Let's see who gets the win. Coming up next, we have Joanderson Brito, who had a bit of a boring fight against Isaac Thompson, who is 23 years old. Isaac Thompson looked pretty good there, actually. He had me sweating after the first round. I had a little bit of cash on Joanderson Brito, and I thought I was fucked after the first round. Joanderson Brito put the grappling together. He put some striking together, especially those leg kicks, and was able to take out Isaac Thompson. But who should Joanderson Brito face? He's kind of in a weird position, Joanderson Brito, where before this, he had a 2-fight losing streak. And so I don't think he deserves to fight particularly high up of the rankings. I think he should fight someone, within striking distance, both up or below, but definitely not, seeking a ranked opponent or next to ranked opponent or another prospect or anything like that. And so because of that, I want to give him a fun matchup in the interim. I think if he wins this matchup, he then deserves to fight a ranked contention fight, if you know what I mean, a fight that will either get him ranked or that will get him a ranked opponent in his next fight. And so let's match him up with Nate Landwehr. I think this fight would be a delight for the fans. I want to see Nate back fighting someone like Joanderson Brito, who has a little bit of name value. Both of these guys have name value, which I appreciate. I think wasting fighters who actually have fans on other fighters who have no fans is pointless. Let's build both these fighters up. I think no matter who loses, it's going to be entertaining. Both their stocks will rise as entertainment fighters. Maybe their stocks won't rise in regards to getting towards that title, but I don't think either of these guys will ever going to get a title to begin with. And this is also a good matchup for Brito to get a possible streak going before he gets to those rankings. Hypothetically, if he beat Landwehr, he'd have 2 fights in a row that he's won at that point. He would probably need a third to get the ranking. I think that's adequate for a ranking. Not everything's about rankings, though, but I do think this would be a very fun matchup. And I do think also that Nate is effective enough on the ground, especially during scrambles, to make this a predominantly stand-up fight, which is really what we want to see from both these guys. Both their stand-up is very fun. I think they'd have a lot of awesome, car crash style moments, and the potential for either a crazy fight or a crazy finish is very high. And so I'd love to see this. Moving on to Yaroslav Amosov. He submitted Neil Magny. Neil Magny is another unk of the card who I think he's starting to actually become washed at this point. I don't think that he's the gatekeeper that we thought he was. At least not this point in his career anymore, which is perfectly fine. He's pretty old. I forget, he's like 37 or something like that. But Amosov, he was a Bellator champ, which means something. And they gave him Neil Magny for a reason. Magny does have somewhat of a name. He is close to the rankings. And because of that, let's give Amosov the first ranked opponent in welterweight, Daniel Rodriguez. I do know how Daniel Rodriguez is in the rankings. I still don't think he belongs there. And I think let's strike while the iron is hot. Let's have Amosov fight D-Rod while D-Rod is still ranked. I think Amosov takes this as an opportunity to show striking off more. It is tough for Amosov, though, because in looking past D-Rod during my, research for these rankings, for this matchups, I do not see Amosov really beating anyone else. Welterweight is absolutely stacked past D-Rod, and he's going to need some serious skill or acts of God to get past them. The only guys I see Amosov beating in welterweight, and I don't think he'll get some of these matchups, Colby Covington. I don't think the UFC is going to give him Colby. Gilbert Burns, same things. Those guys, their name value is too high for them to fight Amosov. I think he could eventually fight in Usman if Usman went down in the rankings a little bit more. But again, I don't think they're going to give him that name value. Same thing with Bilal Muhammad. I think that's actually a more realistic later fight in his career, potentially that to win after D-Rod if Bilal falls more in the rankings, because it's his nickname is Remember the Name, but honestly he has no fan base. And maybe a Geoff Neal. I think he could maybe beat a Geoff Neal. I think he could maybe get that as a matchup. That being said, it's going to be extremely difficult for him to move forward in the rankings. I don't see him getting a title shot at any point. But I think for now, D-Rod is his best next matchup. I think it's his best chance for him to get a ranked opponent. And I think it's a little fun. D-Rod likes to keep it banging. He is cheeks on the ground. And so as long as Amosov doesn't play a complete wrestle fuck game plan, then it'll be an interesting fight. Moving on to my new favorite heavyweight besides Tom Aspinall, Steven Asplund. This dude, who would have thought? Who would have thought that the heavyweight Max Holloway would be a dude who used to be 500 fucking pounds? Like, are you fucking kidding me, heavyweight division? I genuinely, guys, I had to look at the entire heavyweight roster in order to look for matchups for Steven Asplund, and it is so fucking disappointing how bad this division is. And I get it. There's not a lot of humans on Earth who want to fight in MMA who are this big and this athletic. They usually fight in other sports. I've heard all the fucking arguments, but if you are in the UFC, if you are actively getting paid to fight, how are you not dieting? How are you not doing cardio? How is someone who used to be 500 fucking pounds figured it out better than these other guys? It does not make any sense. It doesn't make sense. And I respect Steven Asplund for that. You know, I think he's hilarious. I think his celebrations are incredible. I think his interviews are also incredible. I think his story is great. This guy's super promotable. The UFC doesn't do promotion anymore, but he is promoting himself using the platform they give him, which is the model that superstars have to run now. And so I think we're looking at a potential future superstar. And if you look at the heavyweight division, outside of the top 10, I don't see anyone beating him. Inside the top 10, if he is able to get a guy in the second round, I think he beats half the top 10. I think very athletic, explosive strikers and wrestlers can beat him, basically finishers. I think guys who are on a different level of skill, maybe, Almeida's, Jalton Almeida's, things like that. But barring that, I think Asplund is going to feast in heavyweight, especially financially, which at the end of the day is all these fighters care about, especially a fighter like Asplund. And I think his next matchup, I think they need to continue building him. Not that they have a roster where they can really build up heavyweights anymore. If you win, you get a ranking. Tai Tuivasa is in a 5-fight losing streak, and he's still ranked. I think Asplund would beat the shit out of Tai Tuivasa. He could get caught. I think he just 1-2s Tai Tuivasa to death. But let's feed him an absolute jobber. The loser of the card, in my opinion, Marcus Buchecha. And my logic here is simple. I'm not a fan of Marcus Buchecha. He has, I think, one fight left on his contract after this draw that he had with Kennedy Nichachuk, fucking whatever his last name is, fucking African last name. And this fight is interesting for two reasons. First, the style differential. Asplund is a stand-up fighter, and Buchecha is very obviously a BJJ fighter. I want to see Asplund possibly tested on the ground. His career is very short. He's had a Contender Series fight and his debut. I want to see him tested on the ground regardless. I don't think he'd get submitted because Buchecha's reaction to strikes is fucking horrible. And I do think it would be worth seeing the grappling threat that Buchecha has to offer. And I think it would also be hilarious watching Buchecha's face go, oh, oh. as light jabs from Steve Asplund, land on his face. He's an absolute bitch. Um, and I think, you know, a decent one too from Steve Asplund would put Buchecha down. Not cold, but he'd get those knockdowns, and Buchecha would. Buchecha cannot handle striking. Um, Another interesting thing I'd like to see that I love seeing matchups like this. I love seeing fighters who have inverse cardios, inverse gas tanks. Um, and so I like seeing the fighters who have, you know, a motor on them, a great gas tank, versus those fighters who have no motor but are very explosive, maybe. Those are always very fun. And so somehow, though, the dude who looks like he's on steroids, dog shit cardio, the dude who literally was 500 pounds, OP ass cardio, and I think Asplund would look like I said, heavyweight Max Holloway versus Buchecha in this fight. Ultimately, I think it would be a good opportunity to get Buchecha out of the fucking UFC. He does not belong in there. And for Asplund to show some of his grappling and basically to get another second round TKO. And so Steve Asplund, Marcus Buchecha. And that's my last matchup. These are all my matchups for UFC Fight Night Kape versus Royval. If you agree, disagree, comment below. I'm going to be posting predictions, matchups, weigh-ins, press conference reactions. I'm going to be having tier lists